Well, we're on the earliest this year after a Penguins game, 9:30. That one really flew by, thankfully, after the first period of play, a historic first period of play that saw the Penguins fall behind 6-0 at home. That's the first time in their history they've ever trailed a game 6-0 at home. Just the second time they've ever trailed 6-0 after one period in general, and just the third time that they gave up 6 goals in a first period in the team history. First time since 1988. I was 3.5 years old for that one in a loss to the Rangers. Tonight, a big-time loss to the Dallas Stars. 7-1, one of the NHL's best teams, decimates the Penguins at PPG Paints Arena after what I consider to be a fairly encouraging road trip and a couple of really solid efforts against some good squads. At least we think the Capitals are good, but the Penguins maybe took advantage of a sloppy Washington team last Friday. Regardless, it was an impressive win, and I was on with you after the Carolina game last week, in which I thought the Pens went toe-to-toe with the Canes for a couple of periods before it got out of hand, and I would argue the Canes got lucky to win that game. There was no luck about it tonight. The Penguins were so bad this evening. They looked like the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Penguins were playing the Dallas Stars. Maybe even that's flattering to the group of talent the Penguins sent out there on the ice. It was horrible right from the start. They had no jump. They had no organization. It was basically the worst of all worlds. Joel Blomqvist didn't exactly drape himself in glory either, as he got a real opportunity, back-to-back starts for the rookie, but in his 8th NHL appearance, he is pulled for the first time. Nedeljkovic mops up. He gives up 4 goals of his own, and really could have been even worse. Ned was actually pretty sharp the rest of the way, but it all doesn't matter after you fall behind 6-0 after one period, and it's essentially all garbage time. So here we are talking about another Penguins loss and another embarrassing loss on home ice. They got smoked by the Rangers 6-0 in the opener a few weeks back. You'll probably recall. This one I think was worse. This one you never had hope. You never had any kind of a prayer as a Penguins fan of something competitive, which is super disappointing considering I was looking forward to this one. Maybe you were too, to see where the Penguins measured up. But with the exception of that Washington game, if it's a good team, the Penguins are going to lose to them this year. And if it's a bad team, they have a shot. They have a better than average shot to beat them. So perhaps the Red Wings coming in on Wednesday will be just the tonic they need. Actually, the next 3 games, Detroit, San Jose, and Columbus all at home. Heck, they'll probably go 3-0 and get our hopes at least a little bit up for right now. But if there was ever any question about where the Penguins are headed this season and how capable they are of making a run, I think this game would certainly disabuse you of any kind of delusions of grandeur. Not that I thought that they were going to make a serious push in the final 60-some-odd games, but I know they're better than this, and that's what makes it really disappointing is it follows up a really fun win at Washington. But, of course, we're right back to reality or whatever is closest to it here at PPG Paints, and the Penguins get booed off the ice in the first period. In fact, from what I heard over the broadcast, it seemed like the fans actually took it easy on them. They could have been a lot harsher on the Penguins. But that was one of the worst games I've ever seen this team play. When I say this team, I mean anybody with a flightless foul on their chest, dating back to the X Generation days. Admittedly, I wasn't around for the pre-Mario Lemieux days. Like I was just telling you, I was only 3 years old for the last time the Penguins gave up 6 goals back in 1988. So my version of lean times would have been 02 through 05, 06, something like that. If you're of an older vintage, then you do remember the pre-Mario days and had to have felt something like this on a lot of those nights when they were intentionally tanking, or should I say, wink, wink, intentionally tanking for Mario Lemieux. This one looked like a full-fledged tank. This one seemed like they actually were trying to lose. I know they're not, but tough to keep up that type of a perception when you come out this poorly against a good team. That's the thing. It's not like the Pens were playing down to their opponent. They should have known they had to be at their best tonight, and they were the complete opposite. They were at their worst. So let's take a look at some comments here. We've got them. I know you've got some criticisms. You've got some pointed commentary, so fire it my way. Devin Wolf says the Pens look like a beer league team. Is this the last of Sully? I'm increasingly thinking this season will be Sullivan's last, and I'm increasingly thinking that he might not make it through the rest of this season. It's tough to survive this many embarrassing performances, and we've seen plenty of them. The game at Vancouver stands out, the game at Edmonton when they were completely outclassed for the entirety of that game. This game was pretty similar to that game, except this game had the added ignominy of being on home ice. Then you have the Rangers game, the opener, like I mentioned, too. The game against Carolina at home when they were outclassed, outchanced, out everythinged. But I put this one right at the bottom of the list of the sucky performances this year, to put a fine, elegant point on it. It's amazing we have 4 or 5 to choose from already, and we're how many games in? Not even 20 games in. The Penguins have played, let's see here, 17 games. They have lost 9 in regulation, and at least 4 or 5 of those were complete stinkers, just never a chance to win. So they dropped to 6-9-2 to the Penguins. They're 3-4-0 at home. It was quite the display by Dallas. I'll say that. They kept the pedal down. I give them credit. They didn't lose their focus until maybe the second period when things got rather wide open. And like I said, they could have put in a couple more. It could have easily been a 10 spot for Dallas tonight, but they were robbed a few times by Alex Nedeljkovic. I'm guessing Ned will get the start against his old squad in the Red Wings on Wednesday. I don't think I'd go back to Blomqvist. I don't think I'd start Tristan Jarry at home yet. I think I mentioned that the next 3 games are at home. It's actually not true. The Columbus game is on the road. I want to say this upcoming weekend. The Detroit game is here at home. So a chance for Nedeljkovic maybe to make a decent statement, but at some point you got to figure the Pens are going to put Jarry back in there and see what they have in him this year. They know what they have in him, I think, big picture wise, but they got to give him a look, because what's there to lose at this point? And he's a guy that is going to be tough to stash in the minors and get through. Well, I guess he could get through waivers, but you have a guy in Blomqvist who you don't have to put through waivers to send back down to the AHL. So I'm imagining at some point they're going to go back to 2 goalies, and Jarry is going to get a run here. Let's take a look here. Sarah says, I think the Carlson trade was a bad idea. Well, yeah, at this point, I think it's pretty easy to say that, isn't it? And I didn't mind it at the time. I thought it was a pretty good roll of the dice. Just hasn't worked out. And Carlson actually wasn't noticeably bad tonight, which is a rarity in some of these really bad games, because he has been the culprit on so many goals against this year, and looking confused and really like a dumb hockey player. Not saying he lacks intelligence in all aspects of life, but he's played some dumb hockey this year. And tonight, maybe an exception. I think Matt Gajtka probably wears the dunce cap this evening for a couple of really huge mistakes that helped the Stars take a small lead out to a large lead late in the first period. No one I know comments, I remember the X Generation days. How could you not if you were around? They weren't the most talented team, but I don't remember feeling they didn't put in the effort. They just weren't good enough. This team is different. I would say that team, those teams back then, knew they had to play their absolute hardest or they would get embarrassed. And there were a few of those, right? No team is perfect when it comes to pushing all their chips in each and every night. You almost can't do that in an 82-game schedule. But it's happened too often for this Penguins team. And I think the ironic thing this year is that Mike Sullivan has actually coached with a lot of urgency, much more urgency than what we've seen in recent years. He's gone to the goalie carousel. He's switched up lines. He's switched up defense pairings. He's tried plenty of new things this year, because I think he knows that if this team has any prayer to keep it interesting in the second half of the season, they've got to win and win right now, and they haven't responded for him. So there's a disconnect between the coach and the players, and I think we all know which side usually wins when it comes to big sweeping changes, even though we've seen the votes of confidence from Kyle Dubas and the Fenway Sports Group, their chairman, Tom Werner, on how good they think Mike Sullivan is. How many more of these games, how many more of these stretches of play can they tolerate before they decide to pull that big lever that says coaching change on it? I'm not really sure about that. In fact, I'd have to put the odds on the idea that Sullivan will be moved at some point this season. You do have a potential head coach in waiting on the bench in David Quinn. That was my half thought this offseason, that perhaps that was an escape hatch if things went exceedingly badly this year. I don't know about Mike Vellucci, but Quinn at least has coached in the NHL, and he could probably ride the storm out the rest of the way. Jeffrey Curry says, "You feeling me yet? A hockey team is not a spreadsheet." I don't really know what that's in reference to, but I don't think anyone's ever argued that a hockey team is a spreadsheet. Steve M is asking Fenway Sports Group to sell. I'm begging them. I've been begging them since the Islanders series. He means, sorry, you mean sell off players. Okay. And the Islanders series, I'm guessing you mean 2021, the one that Tristan Jarry crapped the bed in and really gave that series away. That was, well, there were a couple of heartbreaks there because I don't know if I would actually agree with you because 2021-22, the team was, I would say, rather solid and then had the 3-1 lead against the Rangers in the first round and were looking like they were set to blow Igor Shesterkin off the map. And then Jacob Trouba gets the elbow up against Sidney Crosby, and the Penguins are down to their third-string goalie, Louis Domingue. Speaking of craps the bed, he craps the bed. There's been a lot of that going around in the Penguins net since the last Stanley Cup win, hasn't there? So it's the goaltending that made me hesitant to say it was the coaching, right, for the longest time because the goaltending has not been good. And I see a lot of folks say, well, who could play goal well behind this Penguins defense? You know what? A lot of goalies could play better than what we've seen in Pittsburgh. It's not a Pittsburgh thing, and I feel like that's revisionist history in a lot of ways because we saw Matt Murray play really, really well behind this Penguins defense. But perhaps you could say that that was just a hot streak and it wasn't sustainable. I guess I would listen to that as well, but it has been a long, long time since we saw anything resembling competent goal prevention, whether it be on the team defense or on the goaltending. It's always some of both in this sport for sure. But hey, I'm not going to argue with you about maybe the necessity for a coaching change going back a couple of years because there have been some notable collapses. But collapses in the playoffs are much more forgivable, I think, than just looking totally disorganized in just a regular season game where the stakes are low and this team looks like it doesn't know what it's doing. There's no real pressure at the moment, or not a lot of pressure. There's always some pressure at this level of play, but not a ton. And they're still playing skittish, playing disorganized, and running around looking like they don't know where to go. So there's a lot of that there. We got a good conversation here between Jeffrey and Steve on the channel. Steve asking for a Crosby trade. I don't think Sid wants to be dealt. So, in fact, if he did, I don't think he would have signed a 3-year contract extension. That was my complaint earlier this year when Crosby looked like he didn't want to be there. Well, why'd you sign the extension then, Sid, if you didn't want to be here? Sid actually showed quite a bit of chutzpah in that second period, going after Sam Steele, trying to get something going, or at least just trying to make it interesting for the fans. And we do appreciate that, Crosby. We do like that. Malkin had a couple of flashes, too. I'm not saying guys weren't trying, but it was just effort aimed in the wrong direction, especially in that first period. And by the time they looked like a hockey team again, it was already garbage time. And like I tweeted tonight, the bad part about this game, or not the bad part, one of the drawbacks of a game like that, the bad part was that they lost 7-1. But another drawback is that you really can't take anything positive. You do something positive in the final 2 periods of a game like that. Well, the Stars were in cruise control. They weren't necessarily concerned with their details as much as they were early. So even if you do something right, like Anthony Beauvillier did, scoring off the pass from Puustinen in the second period, what do you do with that? I don't know. You just throw it all in the garbage in the end. And Jeffrey is going to follow up the spreadsheet thing. Dubas looks at a team on paper, not in reality, how they gel, the personalities. I don't know if he does that. I feel like in Toronto, actually, he went the other way. He tried to add more grit, more defense, and try to balance the team out that way. And it still didn't work out because the team still wasn't scoring in the playoffs. Turns out defending wasn't the issue in Toronto in the postseason. I think he did try to make an adjustment in Toronto, and I think he did try to add quote-unquote character guys in Toronto. So I don't think he's at that stage at all. And people talk about Kyle Dubas like he's some quant out of the back room looking at spreadsheets. The guy has worked on the support staff of hockey teams his entire career. He was in the locker room with the Sioux Greyhounds going back to when he was a kid, for crying out loud. So just because he wears glasses, don't make him out to be someone who just looks at the numbers. And I am a big proponent of looking at the numbers and looking at metrics because a lot of times our eyes deceive us. But at the same time, I do understand. I don't underestimate the need for a good mix, and I don't discount the reality that there are things you just can't measure. But for the most part, the job of a general manager is to build a talented roster, and I just think the talent isn't quite there. We've talked about it all year long on these post-game shows. The Penguins have enough bottom six talent. They have enough bodies to fill 4 third lines if you wanted to, or 6 fourth lines. Pick your number. They have a bevy of guys who can skate up and down the wing and chip pucks in and out. They don't have a lot of guys who can score at the moment. And for me, that's why it was a necessity to put together Crosby, Malkin, and Raquel to at least give them one line that can score, but that's not boding well for your potential long-term to be able to field a balanced roster. So there's some of that. Paul Gauthier has a comment that's always going to get me to put it up on screen. Anytime you mention Jaromir Jagr, I'm going to be a sucker for that. Get him to coach. Couldn't hurt. There have been rumors that he's going to join the organization in some regard. Actually, not rumors, real reports from Josh Yohe of The Athletic, among others. At least I read Josh's report on that last year when we had the big Jagr homecoming and the reunion, which was a feel-good moment for everybody in a season that certainly went bad at the end. Jeffrey's following up, getting rid of Jake, Sid's favorite winger, and putting Beauvillier in, who is a journeyman. I just don't think they would have been able to fit Gensel under the salary cap. And if they did, do they want to sign him for that long? I think what Dubas is doing right now is rebuilding without calling it a rebuild. And I think he's probably told guys like Crosby that they're going to take a step back this year, which might explain why Sid was experiencing some malaise earlier in the year too. But that's my theory, is that they're not really trying to win this year. The Beauvillier thing is, let's sign a guy, maybe he plays with Sid or Gino, and suddenly he pours in a few goals, then you can trade him for assets. I feel that they are in asset acquisition mode at the time. It is hard to accept, though, and I admit that I thought it would be easier to accept that the Pens were taking a step back, but I guess when it looks this bad, I feel like that's beyond the pale. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, maybe it's all just losses to you. You don't care what they look like, but I find that I do, and I find that it doesn't reflect well on anybody involved, players, coaches, management, when you're getting spanked like this tonight. 6658 asks, is there any reason for Sullivan to continue coaching this team? They're not listening to him anymore. The only reason, and I've laid this out too, but I'll reiterate it, the only reason for me is, what's the benefit of firing Sullivan right now when you could just let him go in the offseason quietly and have a coaching search that is legit? You don't have to try to rearrange things on the fly because this team's not going anywhere anyway. So as sad as that may sound, I think that might be the thing that saves Mike Sullivan this year, and it allows him to go in and coach Team USA in the Four Nations Cup. Maybe they are worried about such appearances and not embarrassing Sullivan in that way. And I think Sullivan deserves quite a bit of leeway. I think I can't necessarily begrudge the Penguins for hanging on to him for this long, because how many coaches have multiple Stanley Cups currently in the league? It's him and John Cooper, and that's it, right? I'm pretty sure. We've got Paul Maurice with one, obviously, Jared Bednar with one, and there's not a lot after that. Not a lot of guys left active who have won Stanley Cups. Barry Trotz is now upstairs. Craig Berube has a cup, but he's on his next team. Just tells you how quick the shelf life can be for hockey coaches. Human being, maybe. Well, we'll see about that. Maybe a bot, maybe AI. That's scary enough as it is. He or she says Dubas got rid of a ton of bad contracts with the EK trade, and that's really the primary bright spot right now, is they're not paying Jan Ruda and Mikhail Granlund and Jeff Petrie, anymore. But yes, Erik Karlsson has been a net negative for this team. And it's so funny because last year I defended Karlsson because I thought he was a net positive last year. Yeah, there were some big mistakes, but there are also some dynamic plays. This year, not nearly enough dynamic plays, and the mistakes that are being made are completely egregious, just mind-blowing mistakes. And I've talked about that ad nauseum already, but it bears repeating. I am not an Erik Karlsson hater. I wasn't last year, but what we're seeing on the ice, what we're seeing on the page too, is a guy who is depleted and is taking away any chance the Penguins have to win a lot of nights. So you can only make so many of those massive mistakes before you start to wonder what is wrong with this guy, and has he completely fallen off? Is he never getting back to his old level? Because we are talking about a Hall of Famer in the future. In the case of Karlsson, we're talking about one of the best offensive defensemen of all time. And you don't get that reputation by playing like you do this year. This has been horrendous. And I know that there's been some talk amongst the Penguins behind the scenes, perhaps, that they can't figure out what's going on with Karlsson. They don't know why he is playing this badly, why he seems so nonchalant as well. That has been something that's stuck in my craw watching a lot of these games. It's ironic that tonight he didn't really do much of anything positive or negative. Actually, the one thing I do recall from him is that pretty brilliant behind the back pass to Crosby, which Sid promptly fumbled. So even that couldn't go right for the Penguins. Okay, Jeffrey's arguing with me, so I think he's arguing with me. He said he traded for Ryan O'Reilly and Schenn before the playoffs, but he also traded away Marchment and got Dennis Malgin in. Okay, we can go over the details here, but yeah, Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Schenn, Braden Schenn. Who was it? I can't recall. Anyway, he also thinks that the Pens are worse off now than under Hextall. I just think that's just degradation of the roster due to age for the most part. I don't think that's necessarily anything Dubas has done. And I think Dubas has taken them intentionally a half step backwards here, if not a full step, just because of what I said. He doesn't see a path to contention for this current group. Steve M is with me, but we should have went full rebuild. There just wasn't the appetite for it. Should have, would have, could have, but the Penguin Stars wanted to stay here. And if you want to pin it on anybody, pin it on Sidney Crosby. If you want to blame somebody, because he's the one who has all the political power in Pittsburgh, he could have said, okay, let those guys go. I'll hang in, and then we'll roll from there. Or he could have just said, let me go. But they all want to stay. And so really it's their fault in a lot of ways. It's not necessarily Ron Hextall's fault. There were rumors that the reason Jim Rutherford left 3 GMs ago now, the reason he left was that the Penguins didn't want to break up the core. So you could really blame the core. And as Gable Fisk reminds us, 3 more years of Chris Letang's contract. Malkin's got 2 more. Luke says he thinks the Penguins are in the middle. Oh, they're definitely in the middle. They're the definition of the middle right now. Look at the standings. Look at their results this year. They can't beat a good team. They can beat the bad teams, so they still give you some hope on a lot of nights, and I'm sure they'll look pretty darn good against the Wings on Wednesday. I'm almost certain of it. They'll look a lot better than they did tonight. I know that much. But can you really rebuild in the NHL without a top 3 pick? You can, but it's tough, right? And even then, if you get a top pick like a Shane Wright, ask the Kraken how that's going. They're just now working him into the lineup, and we're, 3 years down the line from him being taken at the top of the draft. So you got to get lucky in addition to that top 3 pick in order to get that generational talent, if you will. And even then, just ask Connor McDavid. You could say that the Oilers are a little thin on the back end. And I even argued that last year when they went to the final. These guys are being carried by the top group there, the top group of talent, which includes 2 of the top 5 guys in the world, and McDavid, the top guy. I don't think that's a controversial opinion. And Draisaitl, one of the top 5. I believe they were dragged to where they got to last year. And I think we're seeing some of that this year, that maybe they weren't quite that good, because when you take the top guys off the ice, they're very, very average. So, but then again, you look at teams like Carolina. They've been able to rebuild without, or build, I should say. They never really tore it down. They've just been this constant, intimidating presence. Hasn't happened in the playoffs for them so far, but maybe one more knock on the door here, and they break it down. This could be their year, and they've done it without any kind of top 10 talent in the league. I think Aho is probably in the 10 to 20 range if you're talking about individual guys, and he's their best guy. So they've made it work with a cohesive system. And they've had a really good quant-oriented plan, if you will. Now they've got a GM who is a full-fledged numbers guy, I guess you would say. Analytics heavy general manager in Eric Tulsky, who didn't even play hockey at any level. I think that's really actually encouraging for hockey. You're seeing some new voices get in there and what they have put together in Carolina, with a lot of help from Don Waddell over the years, of course. But now he's out of there, and the Canes still have this staying power even after losing some guys and moving on from some players. Steve M says, you said it. I blame Crosby for so much. I still blame him for Pascal Dupuis on the first line. Well, that worked out okay, didn't it? Dupuis and Kunitz were some of Sid's best line mates. Look, when you have a guy like Crosby, you're going to defer to him. And that's just where they're at. And that's where they were at for the longest time. And Sid's the most powerful guy in Pittsburgh. So he wants the team to stay together. They're going to stay together. I don't really know what to do with that besides just move on, punt on that topic and go to something else, which I will here, as JR asks, is Rutherford the real villain here? Maybe he's the real hero because he was actually trying to rebuild the Penguins and they wouldn't let him. So, or at least that's the thought. That's the thought. There has never been a solid report that Rutherford was trying to move, say, Letang or Malkin, and he couldn't, so he quit in a fit, and now doing quite well, it looks like. In Vancouver, they've put something together out there. Maybe we could just say this is what was going to happen regardless of how well they handled the whole situation. You could point to Washington, but we'll see about Washington. I'm not sure they're that good. In fact, I know they're not this good. I figure they'll drop off a bit, and even if they peak, the Capitals do, what are they really? They don't have any kind of stars. Maybe Connor McMichael turns into something legit, but their best star power guy is Alex Ovechkin, obviously, and his hot start aside, he's 38 years old, and he's not going to be able to continue this either. This is just a team that I think is in the middle, and the Penguins are in the middle, and I still rather be the Penguins than the Capitals because the Penguins have a couple more Stanley Cups in this era. So I guess at this point, on a night like tonight, you've got to rest on the whole banners fly forever theory. And it's not a theory, it's a reality. But I suppose the question is, how much pain are you willing to deal with on the back end after the party is over? And it sure does seem like it is. And I fought hard to not get all nihilistic about this Penguins team and say, oh, it's all over. There's no use even worrying about the details. I do side more with Dan here at the website at Pittsburgh Hockey Now. He is breaking this team down as if they are trying to win, and the players and coaches are trying to win. But I'm just I'm uncertain. In fact, I'm fairly certain that they've been set up to take a step back this year by management, and so that is an overarching theme, I guess you would say, over what's going on. And so that's why I am not apoplectic, I suppose, after some of these defeats that have been not even close. Tonight being the worst example of that. But hey, I'm human, and I care about appearances just as much as some other people do. And I know that the players are embarrassed by how badly, or at least they should be, by how badly they have shown up on some nights this time around. Chris Beddick. Hello, Chris. At one point, the Stars had 6 goals on 12 shots, and they were all just brilliant scoring chances, too. I know Yoel Blomqvist didn't have his best night, but at the same time, those were quality looks for the Stars. And that was more the story for me early. I was kind of concerned it was going to be, the rookie goalie just didn't have it tonight and the Penguins lost 4-1. But it's almost better this way because you can just say they were totally outplayed, they were dominated, and there's no ambiguity about why they lost. They lost because they were the worst team by far, maybe one of the worst teams in the league. When we get to the end of the season, maybe this is just the start of the ultimate tailspin here after that little blip on the road trip. Maybe they do fall down into a lottery position, which could be the best thing for the future, but it's going to be painful because we still have 60 some odd games to go. All right. So that's going to be it for me. Want to look at some out-of-town scores? We've actually got some really good viewership tonight. The Pen should lose by a bundle every night. You want joy or you want anger, right? You don't want that in between. And a lot of times this year, the Pens have been in between. But they've thrown in some really interesting results. Interesting being the operative word. Speaking of interesting, we had a matinee this afternoon. Montreal beat Buffalo 7-5. So the Sabres still struggling to make any headways. There's a team you wouldn't rather be is the Buffalo Sabres, who have set the NHL all-time record for most consecutive seasons out of the playoffs. Yes, it's harder to make the playoffs now than it used to be. Half the teams missed. Used to be, a third of the teams missed for a while there in the late 80s, early 90s, but still, the Sabres remain down bad. The Flyers beat the Sharks in a shootout. We've got Nashville struggling mightily. Would you rather be the Nashville Predators, who have knocked on the door several times, and then they load up this offseason in free agency, and they have completely fallen flat out of the gate. They do lead the Avalanche right now early in the second period, and Calgary up on LA. I wanted to check the standings actually before we leave, because I've been trying to count the teams below the Penguins in the standings, and the numbers are dwindling, my friends, especially when you consider the Pens have played 17 games already. Bob Grove noted this this evening. He said if the Penguins win tonight, they didn't, but if the Penguins win tonight, they would be actually in a playoff position if they would have gotten 2 points, although they have played the second most games in the NHL. So they have just 14 points out of 17 games. The only team below them in the Metro is Columbus. We'll see them later this week. The Jackets, after that strong start, they've begun to falter in a major way. Also, the Red Wings and the Canadiens below the Pens in the East. So the Pens fourth from the bottom in the East. And we've got the Blackhawks, the Predators, and the Ducks below them out west. So not too many teams left. The Pens are in a lottery position, but they could easily go on and win the next 3 games. Like I said, the schedule coming up, they've got San Jose, they've got Detroit, and they've got Columbus. So would you be surprised if they won all 3, and then suddenly we're talking about, the resurgent Penguins, until the next time they play a good team. All right, thanks to Jeffrey. I know that he's been all over the chat. I appreciate that, Jeffrey. Really good feedback, and I enjoyed the debate with you for sure. Kind of tough to do when I'm trying to check some other comments as well, but thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who joined in. Certainly an emotional night when the team looks as just utterly decrepit as it did in the first period. Pick your adjective. Just open up the thesaurus and call Rogers for me. We can find some more negative adjectives to lump upon this team, because they deserve each and every last one of them tonight. Dallas 7, Penguins 1, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday after the game against the Red Wings. Good night, God bless, and see you then on Pittsburgh Hockey Now.